morning to all our guest audience joining from Latin America and the Caribbean, and good afternoon and good evening to all our audience and to our guest speaker that is joining from other regions. It is a pleasure to welcome you today to our eighth MOVE webinar in English of 2021. Our session today is titled Batteries for Machine Electrification, Relevant Applications for Latin America and the Caribbean. So we have as our guest today, the Limbability industry is a battery system supplier industry based in Taiwan. The company has advanced in the development of battery system for electric vehicles in multiple applications for commercial vehicles, but also in mining, construction, and agriculture. So these areas are key. We see this as a key theme today, considering that these industries represent like 15% of employment for agriculture in the region, and industries represent almost 20% of employment in the region. So we see that sort of these applications of immobility are relevant for the region, and we also recognize the potential of immobility being part of different value chain industries and sectors in Latin America. So we will learn today about the possible applications of Limbability's battery systems, some of the experience that they have had with their products, and how they have overcome some challenges in the development of batteries. And finally, we will also learn how these commercial vehicles and industrial vehicles can be electrified as an interesting solution for the Latin American and Caribbean region. So our presenter today is Sherwood. He's a mobility advocate that supports startups implementing out-of-the-box solutions to daily problems across borders. He's the director of business development in Limbability. With his background and experiences in IT solution, pharmaceutical, and fintech, Sherwood brings new business perspectives and crossovers to the company and the EV industry in Taiwan and the world. So welcome, Sherwood. It is a pleasure for us to have you today. And yes, very excited to hear more about how Limbability can sort of be part of the transition of electric mobility in the region. So thank you very much for joining us today.
All right, thank you, Juan. Thank you for inviting me to join remotely to such an exciting session. Allow me to introduce myself a little bit. This is Sherwood from Taiwan. So which means my time zone now is actually 10 o'clock in the evening time, but it's always a pleasure for us to engage with country and regions beyond our country. I'm here on behalf of Limbability. I'm serving as a leader of business development, which means I will be covering commercial and most of the government policy part for the company. And as Juan just introduced, Limbability is a company dedicated in design and manufacturing EV battery systems. So today, as invited, I would like to share some point of view about electrification and also some achievement and some observation Ling has done in the field. So I will start with a introduction to the macro landscape, which I believe in many of the audience, you might already understand a few detail about the dimension and the perspective of the field. So we all know automotive industry being one of the industry driver for most of the economies. And we all know in the past internal combustion engine era, there are different segments which show different potential and profitability in the field. As we know, there are technology paradigm shifts. There has been changes in the drivetrain approaches. And as we can see on the screen, I have quoted a report from McKinsey. It shows the market size and the market portion changes. And the middle of the paragraph of the chart, you'll be able to see there are 48%, which we call stable components. There are structure parts, there are AC system, wheels, seats, and whichever you can think of a vehicle. But gradually through the paradigm shift, it though remains stable, but it still a little bit decreased to 37%. And 2019, between 2019 and 2030. There are a few components we believe would be dropping in terms of percentage. They are the original critical parts, engine systems, transmission, fuel injection, which might be decreased from 26% to 11% according to McKinsey's research. The growing part, which I know would be the critical and expected topic of today, would be dedicated hybrid transmission, the batteries, the domain control, and all the systems which would emerge in the electrification era. So these we find would be doubly grow from 26% to 52% in 11 years. And the trend, which has been justified through the investment value, because we know there are already 100 billion would be invested starting the beginning of 2020, and there are a very huge wave of the IPO hot money flowing into such era, which would be support the development of the industry. Beyond the automotive part, actually, we see there are a key segment have been impacted through the critical topic we have been discussing. As the world have been focusing on the COP26 in United Kingdom, there are ESG and sustainability requirement, which is the most important moment for human history. Before 2020 and 2021, I believe the world hasn't reached consensus in regard to the ESG part. And now we're already at the moment. Talking about the carbon emission, the key factor might actually not from the automotive industry. From the automotive industry, but not from the automotive usage. We know there are working machines who have been driving the economy, which are commercial and industrial vehicles. These vehicles usually considered as industrial, we can separate it into construction, agriculture, and mining are the main business operation center of the carbon emission. We can find that beyond the automotive system, if we put the total available market of commercial and industrial system together with the renewable energy storage system, which is really a focus at these days, there has been showing a very great potential of US dollar 800-ish billion by 2027. And we can see a bar chart also quoting from the ID TEDx report that shows there are key surges in such a field. And you will be able to know a few detailed elements in the following discussions. Due to these potential and ignore segment of the market, Limbability and the team has been interviewed and hosting focus group with users and potential customers worldwide. And we have identified a persona which we name him as Bob. Let me give you a brief introduction about such a persona. Bob is a agriculture fleet owner in Kentucky State of United States. So he feels heavily about the ESG regulation and the impact from the climate changes. As knowing that Tesla enjoying the profitability and also the trend of electrification, he's seeking for the electrification solutions worldwide. However, we have find out some of his expertise on his and some absence of the ability on himself as well. Bob is a master in producing chassis for specific applications. As we just mentioned about his background, he owns a agriculture fleet. So definitely he has been working in the field for more than 30 years. And in such a application, some of you might understand the industrial machine vehicle makers, they not necessarily would use their own drivetrain. They most of the time they purchase third-party engines to install, like Volvo, like Cummins, like JCB. That's the way of working in the field for such a long time. And also because of the variety of the applications in the field, Bob is also seeking for low volume, high mix of application in the field. However, during this time, he suffers some bottleneck while doing electrification because there are a de facto gap of know-how between internal combustion engine and electric powertrain. The gaps we have been identifying is the know-how would be totally different from a automotive electronics to a high voltage system in terms of powertrain on electric vehicles. So it's definitely not easy to inherit such ability from the previous experience. That's also what we see from how uh, other automotive makers is competing hardly with Tesla because these experience wasn't accumulating in the past development of their business. You can see in downside of the screen, there are three expertise Bob has to accumulate in the process of develop the electric vehicle. You have to procure and integrate systems he wasn't familiar with, and also this size and shape and weight requirement would be totally different from a battery and electric motor point of view. Thirdly, and which would be the key factor we'll mention in the upcoming discussion, there will be reliability and safety standards they will have to meet. However, at this moment, it's not easy to identify. Um, Beyond these expertise, we find out that a low volume, high mix of application is not just justifying the high custom R&D investment for electric systems. In the past times, there have been a global giant who can supply internal combustion engine and components through 50 years or even longer history of the automotive development. But for automotive system, motor and especially battery has been developing just maybe 1 or 2 decades and is not reaching the status of matureness, which can support the low volume high mix system. So taking Bob himself, for example, he is not at the level and not at the position to invest such huge capital to support his requirement. And thirdly, as we just mentioned in the safety part, even though he is capable of accumulating such expertise and to raise such capital, the industry standard is not yet at the place, is not yet in the place to support the expansion and the optimization of the deployment. So we find out even though Bob would like to engage and to immerse into the electrification trend, it is indeed very hard for him to catch up the trend. Among these bottlenecks, there are a very serious part which would be challenging for all the mechanical engineering and technicians. Some of you might know Tesla is a expert on the computing and auto driving system. Tesla is also the largest battery pack provider in the world. Why battery pack being such a important factor is because on an electric vehicle, there are a very key factor which will affect the whole entire performance of the vehicle, which would be the heat. We know battery would be the temperature would go high as we are charging and discharging the whole system. Now there's a second source of heat, which we know as power electronics, which could go high to 100 Celsius degree or even to 175 Celsius degree. These heat sources impact the whole system design and the whole management concept of the vehicle. We know there has been a few car fire accidents with Tesla every quarter or every half a year. We also are aware that there is a very tremendous battery wall accident in Australia earlier in August and September this year. These are these are deriving from the MMC battery cell characteristic in nature. The battery cell most of the electric vehicle is using at this moment is a MMC battery cell, which is active to support the energy, but is also relatively unstable when the temperature goes high. So even Tesla being the most sophisticated and the largest battery pack provider in the world, it is still a challenge to provide a reliable and safe system for all electric vehicles. Not to mention what we taking, for example, Bob's agriculture fleet working continuously and under a relatively extreme condition, comparing with how a Tesla is driving in the urban area. So to manage the heat is still the biggest challenge to Tesla and all the electric vehicle battery makers. So definitely there has been a very huge investment to cope with such topics. We know at the very beginning there are primitive methods to manage the heat. As we know, Nissan and Toyota Prius at the dawn of electric vehicle, people use air cooling, passive air cooling to manage the heat because at that moment, the performance requirement of the whole battery system is not as challenged as it is today. Gradually, while the performance requirement is raised, all the companies started to develop a different way to manage the heat. As we know, the refrigerant has been introduced to the early generations of Volkswagen vehicles and some of the BMW types, which are still running on the street. The concept of the refrigerant is a very mature on home appliances, but might not be supportive enough to the vehicle. Therefore, when Tesla tried to jump into the electric vehicle field, they developed what we call indirect liquid cooling at this moment, which will be generally used on General Motors, the new Volkswagen ID3, some of the cars for Jaguar, and also all the vehicle on Tesla. There are pipes going through battery cells, and there are coolant running through pipes. These coolant and pipe systems would bring away the heat from the battery cells with, I would say, limited capabilities to control the thermal runaway. But that is the currently most used system to deal with the EV thermal management. However, through the time involved and also the requirement of the performance keep raising, we know there are McLaren and Rimac companies trying to file new patents and new technologies, and is known as immersion cooling. The immersion cooling, comparing with air cooling, refrigerant, and indirect liquid cooling, has such advantages as we can see from the table. If comparing with the thermal performance, because immersion cooling, the whole concept of immersion cooling is to immerse the battery cells in liquids, dielectric liquids, which would prevent it from going short circuit, but to bring the heat away. So if we put the color code to distinguish the performance of the system, blue means excellent, green means good, yellow means fair, and red means poor. We definitely know the primitive cooling method, which is air cool, provide the lowest performance on thermal management, and immersion cooling definitely gives the best performance on thermal. Simultaneously, we can tell that because of the battery cell have to perform evenly, evenly to support the whole system life cycle. If a immersion cooling system can support every battery cell being cooled at the same tempo, it definitely support the best life cycle. In the meanwhile, because as we know from the previous picture, the indirect liquid cooling is using a lot of pipes to go through all the battery cells, there could be liquid or coolant leaking out from the pipes, which result in the thermal runaway of the system. Uh, so even though it provides a relatively good thermal performance, the challenge of the leakage resulting in safety issue being a considerable risk to most of the automaker. I will not go through the whole table for you, but to give you a very quick conceptual explanation about the immersion cooling, as we have been emphasizing some of the advantage of the system. The immersion cooling is to put the battery cell into a dielectric liquid, as I just mentioned in the previous page. The batteries we have tried to use are cylindrical battery cells 18650 or 21700 that are both suitable in such designs. As we immerse to sunk these battery cells in the liquid, we know all the surface of the battery cell could be cooled evenly. So 100% of the surface will be contacted, which provide a superior thermal management. And because the liquid itself is non-conductive, non-flammable, so while there are accident happens, um, the whole system provides a initial support to the safety that allows the driver and the system operator to avoid the risks perfectly. And thirdly, because there are active circulating system which would circulate the liquid through the whole system, we can tell that even there are very high temperature in the battery system, the circulating cooling system will be able to manage it through the sensor and the chips with setting into the system to support the cooling efficiency. In the coming video, I would like to show you a concept explanation through a animation which made by Limbability. So as shown in the video, the concept is to have a cooling system to manage and to operate the whole thermal performance of the battery packs. And there are different modules which allow Limbability to support different customer requirement in terms of shape and size. And the cooling system would accordingly manage the whole heat source and potential thermal runaway. for the system. And originally, the video is elaborating the concept of the immersion cooling design, but is the immersion cooling design being really practical in terms of safety and performance? Here is a comparison test we have made with and without immersion cooling. This is a test we call battery module penetration test. On the left-hand side, it is a battery module without immersion cooling, and on the right-hand side is a system with immersion cooling. The concept of the test is to have a needle to penetrate or to damage a certain battery cell and to observe the consequence of the thermal runaway. So as you can see on the left-hand screen, there are a needle approaching to the battery module to a specific battery cell. As it's damaged, you can see sparkling coming out. It instantly going into the thermal runaway. And from as time goes, you can see there is a timer on the screen. It gradually brings the heat up to its neighboring cell, and it eventually result in a chain effect just in a few seconds. And after a few seconds, the whole module get exploded in the laboratory. This is actually how things happen on the electric vehicle if it is using a MNC battery cell and without immersion cooling design. So just within a minute, the battery system crashed as a like a very explosive material on the vehicle. On the right hand side, the same needle penetrating the same battery cell on the same module, but with immersion cooling running. So when the battery module and the battery cell is damaged, there are steam and pressure released through the system. There's a volt like ejecting the fluid. And there are steam coming out because the temperature did go high when the battery cell is damaged. But the coolant and the active cooling system circulate to bring the heat away, avoiding the neighboring cell getting on fire through the chain effect. So even though there are certain battery cells would be damaged through accident on the electric vehicle, the whole concept and design of immersion cooling can perfectly avoid the thermal runaway, even on the active NMC battery system. So with such a test comparison, which were made by Limbability 3 years ago, we find out the safety and also the risk aversity being very supportive to the electric vehicle, even when the vehicle got damaged or under a very extreme working condition. So as Limbability introducing the immersion cooling through patent to a lot of countries, we believe with such nature of extended life cycle and the nature to enable ultra fast charging and discharging is probably the coolest system in the world at this moment to support the electric vehicle operation. While the flexibility and efficiency to manufacture is also bringing huge cost saving and tech time to all the fleet owner who would like to do the electrification of the vehicle of their business fleet. And also with what we mentioned through the experiment and the test, we can find out on the right hand side there's a picture indicating one of the battery cell being damaged through the experiment before. And all the neighboring cells we can tell on the screen. And after our test of the voltage and current, they are still working to support the whole system operation. So the unprecedented fire safety nature is definitely giving immersion cooling the name of the safest system to support the electric vehicle. Such technology was introduced by the company Limbability, as Juan has introduced me coming from. We're the global leader in immersion cooling for EV battery system and power electronics. Limbability is a startup founded by two gentlemen coming from Tesla and Panasonic. They have been observing previous experience and ability to trying to build their own electric race car at the beginning of the company. While the process of development such a vehicle, they find out battery being the biggest challenge along the way and derived the immersion cooling battery module, which eventually support the mobility's customer to go electric. As you can see on the screen, right downside, there are municipal tractors we have been engaging with in Canada. We also had deployed a mining pickup truck in Japan for pilot test. There are light commercial vehicle in Taiwan, which potentially we will introduce to the market next year or after. And there has been a continuous cooperation between Taiwan and Norway for mining equipment through Limbability's battery system. In the screen, you can also see some of the achievement Limbability has been giving to the world. Above the timeline, there are internal projects, which we call Miss E, Miss R, Mr. T, and a 1969 electric Camaro. Miss E is the electric race car. In the previous page, I mentioned two of the co-founder of Limbability was dedicating on. And with the experience of vehicle integration and battery development, Limbability has fulfilled a testing platform and a pilot project internally called Miss R. This is the world's first pure electric supercar with two different suspension to go on-road and off-road. With such ability to develop a very high voltage system, Limbability has also given our experience to light commercial vehicle we call Mr. T. This is a diesel engine version of 3.5-ton truck. We pull out the diesel engine and all the drivetrain system and replace it with our battery system and a cooperated motor components to convert it into a electric version. And this has been tested in Taiwan under special certificate for more than 100 kilometers, which continually will be collecting data to support the future electrification of the light commercial vehicle. And last but not least, 1969 electric Camaro is originally a diesel version muscle car, which we also do our own electrification project to convert it into electric, and is now the Mobility CEO's favorite during all these years. Below the timeline, you will be able to see a successful pilot project Limbability has deployed around the world, which would be quietly echo the topic of today, the electrification of working machines. The concrete buggy for individual operation in Japan, and also commercial snowmobile in Finland, following with mining pickup truck in Japan and LCV in Taiwan, municipal tractor in Canada, and mining equipment in Norway. These are all customer with electrification requirement with under extreme working condition and also a very challenging performance requirement. Combining all this nature together, we also had a cooperation with one startup in United States. They work on a urban air mobility project which some of you might already know there are testing projects in Japan and also in Italy in the previous months. So with support with the characteristic to support such a high performance requirement, Limbability has been supporting the ground a ground a battery system for ground testing for such a company. As I have stated in the beginning, Limbability is a company dedicated in design and manufacturing battery system. We have applied and been granted 9 patents worldwide through immersion cooling and such modularity design. And there are a few pending in different countries. We're not a battery cell maker. We also procure from famous battery cell makers in Korea and in Japan, and cooperated with them and cooperated with our vehicle maker customer. We provide know-how to design a battery module and battery system, and eventually integrate it into the vehicle to fulfill the electrification target. So combining with our experience in integrating high voltage system on the race car, Limbability, no, though is not in charge of the system integration, but is capable to support the relative accessory and integration if the customer is looking for such services remotely. But in the meanwhile, we still target to provide the battery system uh, solely for most of the vehicle maker customers. With such achievement in vehicle integration and battery development, Limbability has categorized our target segment into the followings. The first part is definitely based on the introductions of the macro landscape as the commercial industrial vehicles. There are vehicle makers we would like to cooperate with. There are system integrators who is interested in EV integration. And if there are fleet owner who would have a very a large scale of deployment, we will be able to support with our engineering know-how and potentially with our product supply as well. Putting commercial industrial vehicle aside, if some of the OEM company would like to cooperate with Z-Mobility, it will be also our approach to see the engineering know-how and patent being licensed or cooperate with different sectors around the world, whether they are public service vehicles or they are automotive mass production automotive categories, or they are actually tier one suppliers who would like to convert their customer into electric. These would be also one of the perspectives the mobility will be able to support. Last but not least, due to the energy storage system is still mastered by most of the MNC battery cells, because of the safety concern of the MNC cells, as you can see, we discussed earlier in the Australian market, and some of the news has been reported in South Korea. The safety support from immersion cooling and such solutions would be key to renewable energy storage system if the world and most of the sector really plans to deploy in a short period of time. So Limbability is also open to cooperate with power system integrator and also some enterprises if they would like to deploy such energy storage system in-house in their factory, in their assembly line, or in their office buildings. Limbability has planned and trying to deliver over the past 6 years, and some of the achievement we have been reached, which been endorsed internationally. We see a very huge growth in the past year, though Limbability being a startup in Asia, but we have been engaged with customer internationally. There are customers in Europe and some customers in United States, I would not be able to share beyond before a NDA, but there has been a customer who has signed a 7-year volume order with Limbability for the upcoming supply for for commercial vehicle. And also earlier this year in April, Limbability has signed a global partnership with BP Castrol. BP Castrol is the oil major in the world who is also trying to pivot their lubricant business unit into supplying the dielectric liquid. So oil giant like BP Castrol and such other companies would be also one of the driver to support the immersion cooling to be introduced in electric vehicle. Limbability will cooperate with BP Castrol to provide our second generation product with their liquid, which very soon would be able to support the market to all a standard commercial vehicle requirement. These are a few slides I would like to share with you. Limbability target to become a global supplier of safe, reliable, and efficient battery solutions for the world's sustainable future. As we have been discussed earlier in the introduction, there are experience and observation we have collected. And through this webinar, this is a very critical moment from Limbability and a private sector point of view, which we would like to share with you in Latin America and in public sector and all the applications. So feel free to drop me questions in this webinar or after this webinar. So I'll give the time back to Juan, and thank you for the host.
Thank you, Sherwood. Thank you very much for the presentation. We're receiving questions from the audience as we speak, and I'm going to be sharing some of those questions. But first, I do have one sort of general broad question.
Sure.
Sherwood, so how do you see the Latin American region being sort of having large reserves of lithium, joining sort of this value chain industry of battery development, right? So how does Seeing Mobility see the potential of Latin America and maybe potential future collaborations with the region?
Sure. I think from our point of view, Latin America is the key market or the key source to supply the whole industrial development, whether with natural resources or with a market. So there definitely would be ESG regulation and compliance pressures from whether public sector or from the customer. So what we see in the field is that when there are customer requirements to push the electrification at mining fields or from the agriculture farms, there would be potential solution needed, which all the battery system provider or the system integrated provider would have to support. We know there are challenges in the past history that there are only a few commercial or industrial vehicle makers in the world, and I'm not sure if they have physical presence in Latin America. But we believe if there are a new supply chain integration vertically, or there will be approaches or requests from customer from the ESG point of view. Definitely, all the world would be integrated into such a cooperation project. It would not be stopped by geographical boundaries or traditional industry boundaries.
Yeah.
So though Zimbability is not at the position very close to support with such solutions, but I think to start with pilot project or to share the data or the know-how we have been gathered would be definitely support the overall ESG development for these kind of efforts.
Perfect. Thank you, Sherwood. So I'm going to start reading some of the questions that we're receiving from the audience then. So one of them is about the specific charging infrastructure for agricultural EVs, right? So beyond the battery system in and on itself, like how would the charging infrastructure, what is the charging infrastructure that would be needed for those large vehicles and what are the current barriers for that?
At this moment, we do face such challenges at the customer field because some of the agriculture farm and the mining fields are really remote or not connected with the power grid. So the alternative our customer is also surveying is to see if a very large, you can say power bank or energy storage system can be deployed at a site. So these are definitely it's like a gasoline station. So w- even the charging infrastructure provider is willing to integrate the charging interface and probably the charging protocol. There are still energy source needed at the field. It definitely has to come from the very big battery system, which can storage a very huge, a very high kilowatt hour of power. So these are the solutions we can temporarily support. But definitely, if there are power grid system integrator who can co-work with the battery system provider, that would be the ultimate solution. But what we see in our Europe customer, they have been developing or to introducing such concept to the mining fields. So these might be a an intermediate or an interim solution which can close the gap when the world is adopting electricity for a vehicle.
Perfect. Sherwood. So there's a follow-up question that goes sort of connected with that.
Sure.
So the mining sector also sort of has large potential for decarbonization, right? And specifically sort of having this big sort of ambitious image of having both Latin America in really investing in the lithium industry, and how can we sort of ensure that even that process of mining lithium is already clean, right? So would you say that the example that you mentioned of this mining vehicle in Italy and Norway, that sort of you have this precedent already, can be replicable in Latin America?
I'm not sure I'm at the position to make sure it's replicable, but I can say that because as the vehicle itself is universal, it universally wouldn't say connected or they're related or they share the same specification and requirement. Theoretically, the mechanical design and all the power requirement would be the same. If putting the energy source itself aside, because we know there are a very relatively higher renewable energy portion in the power grid, um, wouldn't say that's pure clean, but to bring the safety to the mining field, electric vehicle is already uh, safer comparing the internal combustion system. Taking a underground pit, for example, we know there are a very huge cost to circulate the air for cleaning for the miners to breathe, and also there are um, potential noises from the machine which would cover some of would influence the miners to judge the risk and the potential explosion in the underground field. An electric version of the vehicle would avoid both of the risk. First of all, it's not generating any carbon, any emission for so definitely it brings cleaner air. Secondly, because it's relatively quiet in the working environment, so if there are really accident or there are signs that there could be potentially could be accidents, usually people with electric machines in mining field would be have higher chances to survive from a mining field accidents. So that's one of the reason our customer from Japan and also in Europe is trying to look into such solution to raise the safety or to avoid the risk in the application.
Perfect. Sherwood, so another follow-up question on this is, you just mentioned the benefits in the mining sector of the electrification. But then I also sort of want to understand a little bit more in the agriculture. So what are some
Sure.
of the benefits of it in the agriculture sector? But then one of the questions that we received from the audience is considering just like the impact of the weight in the soil, is that a sort of a detriment? Is that a challenge of like the weight of the vehicles in the agriculture activity in itself, or not?
Yeah, let me reply backwind it. So we do have study a few comparison for the weights between a immersion cooled battery system and probably a non-immersion cooled battery system and the original internal combustion engine system. So between the battery systems is almost the same weight, but battery definitely is a little bit heavier than the internal combustion engine for sure. So that would be something we have been discussing with agriculture vehicle maker that some of the pilot projects they have been tested, the whole weight loaded they can share, and also the operation in ambient environment which they can support. To be very frank, the weight of the battery is still a key challenge for electrification. But I would say if the world is going electric, that will be something all the fleet owner and vehicle maker have to fix together. So
Mhm.
probably in the future, maybe 5 to 6 year, a vehicle maker would adjust the chassis because of the weight. That would be a primitive thought I have in regard to the weight. For your first questions about that, we know there are uh, theoretically um, the emission from internal combustion engine is not very positive or not considering organic. Gradually through some of the certificate for food and for healthy certificate. So if considering if we're developing high quality of food through a organic cultivation, a process to use electric vehicle might be necessary. That's one of a few signal we see in European market. I think that's self-explanatory because it makes no sense if you use internal combustion engine burning a lot of diesel to transport these organic food from France to Germany and claiming it to be a very organic cultivation. So that would be probably not from a technology point of view being necessary to support the electrification, but from a regulatory or the policy point of view to support such a future development.
Perfect. Perfect. So thank you, Sherwood. I have other question that's more related to kind of like you mentioned a lot of like the benefits of the safety
Sure.
of the technology that you develop with the immersion cooling. But then if we leave safety aside, right, we're just
Mm-hmm.
working on like
Mm-hmm.
efficiency and performance, right? Um,
Right.
what are some of both like benefits and imbalances of the technology compared to typical sort of cooling systems for battery? And
Mm-hmm.
does the autonomy changes some way or somehow between one technology or the other? What and maybe when is this redundant, right? When this sort of immersion cooling system is redundant, it does really a small commercial vehicle require such technology, or can it operate successfully and uh, as it is, right? And when does an immersion is redundant for such application, let's say?
Right. I think the question really points out a very key factor that when we're discussing with a few potential customer, especially vehicle maker, they do concern about the actual performance of energy density or the power output. I would say the limitation itself is actually within the battery cells because we're using the same battery cell as all the other battery pack supplier is using. So actually, I wouldn't say the power performance. I think there's not much there are not much gap between the battery pack performances while we're providing the better safety. Some of the other benefits I can share with you would be the ability to support charging, fast charging and discharging, because we know the biggest challenge for users to migrate from internal combustion engine to electrification is probably the range anxiety we probably have known from some of the users of Tesla, and also the time they have to wait to refill, well, if we get to recharge to refill the whole system. So because the high power charging would generate a very high temperature for the battery system. So if taking the charging performance as part of the overall performance, that might be a very great advantage people have been ignored in the previous way of cooling. So this would be one of the factor. And secondly, considering the weight, because immersion cooling doesn't have to go through pipes, we have modules to conceal all of the liquid. We can save all of the copper pipes and some of the radiator and some of the plate to do the thermal management. So the weight itself is actually not, it's almost the same level. So I wouldn't say energy density there's any deficit in terms of energy density for immersion cooling. Their redundancy would be one of the key factor of immersion cooling for sure. So as this Limbability, and I believe also with McLaren and Rimac, people have been developing active safety system to make sure the system wouldn't go wild even if the cooling system is off. So I think that would be the similar last resort manual safety system we have seen for nuclear devices, for example. If you know there will be tremendous risk for the system, there's definitely a few key procedures people or the driver can ensure for the whole safety. So I think that's actually the similar concern for engine and for diesel system. If the cooling goes down, definitely you'll get a very huge risk to the engine system. So there are definitely all the measures to measure and to prevent it from going into a uncontrollable situation. So that's something we have been dedicating on.
Thank you, Sherwood. Yeah, I think that was sort of a catchy question because it's impossible really to leave safety aside, right? That's a key criterion always. So especially as we work with policymakers, that's probably the first thing in the agenda.
Sure.
And then the last question that we have is sort of bringing also back specifically Mobility and the region, right? So what are the views of the company towards the region, right? Is Mobility considering expanding or reaching the Latin American market somehow, considering the big presence of these industries, right? Of agriculture, construction, mining, and industry.
Yeah, that is definitely a big yes. Because we're supporting mostly the system integrator and the vehicle maker, so wherever these customer goes, we will support them as we are needed. Secondly, Limbability would not directly operate in all the country and regions in the world. Definitely, we're looking for system integrating partners, dealers, distributors who will be able to support and to understand the customer requirement locally. So I think one of the key insight we value Latin American market is that there are a such a various requirement in the area which could be potentially integrated by a few distributor or dealers support through because there are less language barrier in Latin America compared with in Asia. And definitely we know where we know there are conglomerate who will be working for the agriculture and mining fields in such regions. So once there are company or customers who is really willing to support electrification with our system, we're definitely open in discussion to see what would be the way of working. Is it through technology licensing or we ship product directly for integration? If there are any training or education session, we can support mutually through technician training or engineering team deployment. These are all open in terms of ESG development because we consider ourselves being one of the biggest advocate to support such trend of renewable future, sustainable future. So definitely, thank you for raising the question, Juan. That's one of the key message I should bring to all the audience earlier. So we're definitely waiting for your invitation to the market or an introduction of yourself.
Thank you, Sherwood. Yeah, I think that's key to share with everyone that's joining today on YouTube. And yeah, we're very grateful for your presence and really the sort of mix of technical, but also bringing it down and making us understand why these things are relevant and important. And I think the development that you guys are doing in the industry and in the EV sector is key. So congrats for all the exciting projects that you guys are implementing, and hopefully the next time that you present, we can have a couple of presidents in Latin America on that timeline. And yeah, thank you very
Sure.
much. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
and we really appreciate your presence.
Thank you for the invitation to host as well, Juan, and thank for the all the audience to join me for such an hour.
All right.